Okay, so it seems like we're now recording. So welcome everybody, thanks for coming. And let's start. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Tirayat Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. So we're speaking from Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, chapter 2. And so just as a short introduction and review, it's always good to review these things. We've done 3 classes so far. So the chapter has been, as far as I can tell, there's kind of 4 sections to the chapter. We've gone through the first 3 of them, and I'll just go through it a little bit again because they're just really interesting parts, and repetition is not a bad thing, especially in Krishna consciousness. I heard once someone said that the key to Krishna consciousness is repetition. I don't know how absolute that statement is, but it's a nice one. Certainly, we like repeating things about ourselves. I have a friend, Namruchi, and I was giving class, I think, on the next chapter, the third chapter, and I was kind of like, oh, I'm going through all the avatars. I'll segue into that a little bit later, but going through all the avatars, and I told her, I was like, oh, I feel bad because I'm just repeating stuff that everybody already knows, about these avatars. And she made this really nice point that it's just coming to my mind. She's like, well, we have absolutely no problem talking about ourselves over and over, repeating things about ourselves. Even if we know that people already know those things, we still kind of relish speaking about ourselves. And especially if somebody doesn't know our story, then we're even more enthused to speak about ourselves. But speaking about the topics of Krishna, just because we don't have taste, that we feel like, oh, we've already gone over this. I've already said all these things. But once you have taste, you can kind of like go over these things over and over again. And she was just making the point to not worry about giving class if people already knew all the things. She was just saying, people do that about themselves all the time, and these are transcendental subjects. So it was a nice point, and I keep that in mind. So repetition isn't a bad thing. And I just wanted to go over quickly the 3 sections that we went through in the chapter. So the chapter is divided. The first section is basically, as we spoke, of offering respects to the questioners. In this case, it was the sages at Naimisharanya asking questions to Sutta Goswami. So he offers respects to them, mostly for the questions, because the questions are the impetus that causes us to come out. And he offers also respects to Shukadev. But the point kind of is like in the Bhagavatam, the kind of famous questioner is Maharaj Parikshit. And really Maharaj Parikshit is 50% of the Bhagavatam. His necessity and his answering, his need to have his questions answered, and Shukadev is the other 50% of the Bhagavatam. So this is this dynamic of hearing and chanting, and so this is what's really kind of emphasized in a couple of different verses in that first section of the chapter, where he's offering respects. This questioning and questions and answers go hand in hand. Like hearing and chanting, they go hand in hand. You could just do one, but actually our method of kirtan is very much a call and response. There's other forms of kirtan and other traditions and other sects and stuff that is not so much. Ours is, I think, very characterized by by this call and response, emphasizing this questioning and answering questions. So Maharaj Parikshit is 50%. The questions are 50%, and this is what is kind of brought out in this first section of the chapter. And then he offers respects to Sukadeva again with beautiful verses describing how Sukadeva was dear to the whole world, how even the trees loved him, and how the whole world was dear to him. He spoke the highest benefit for the benefit of all. Karunya, this word compassion is used. So all people could be free from this cycle of samsara. When in these verses, when Shukadeva is glorified in that way, it always reminds me of this story of Ramanuja, and I think I saw it in a movie about Ramanuja. It was very long. I remember that, but there was a cute part in it where, well, not a cute part, but a powerful part where I think Ramanuja, forgive me if I get the details wrong, but Ramanuja is initiated with this mantra, and the guru says, this is the mantra, it's very powerful, it can liberate you from samsara, it can free you from the bonds in the material world, but this is a sacred and secret mantra, so don't tell it to anyone. And then when Ramanuja heard that, he went out and climbed a lamppost, or he went out and climbed, to the top of a post or something, and started shouting the mantra to everybody, because he wanted to share the fact. He was shouting it from the rooftops. He wanted to share it with everybody, because it was, he had learned that it was able to liberate one from the bondage of matter, and he didn't care if it, he would be sent to hell for that. So he did it purely to the point being just that he, his compassion kind of overrode it, and he went around sharing that mantra. Similarly, Shukadeva is glorified for his compassion for speaking this Purana Guhyam, these secrets of all. Like Ramanuja was told, this is a secret mantra. Similarly, Shuka is revealing the Purana Guhyam, the secrets of the Purana. And then the section ends kind of going to the presiding deities, like the verse that I just chanted at the beginning here, offering respects to those that safeguard or manage the different elements of the text, the meter, the place, and whatnot. So that's the first section of this chapter. Then the second section of the chapter moves to answering the questions that were given in the first part, and this is a very important section too, because this is where the definitions of pure bhakti are drawn from, and many of the important points that are made in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and also ultimately you find them in Madhurya Kadambini too, that it's kind of all expands out of this this section. So they answer the questions as to what is the best thing for all of humanity, and by what will we find true satisfaction. That's answered with the famous verse Savai Pumsam Karo Dharmo, which is the famous definition of pure bhakti, and it lines up, with all the other texts. We can see it kind of as the seed of Rupa Goswami's definition, and how that all expands and blossoms into the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and Madhurya Kadambini. So it's a very famous verse. A lot of these famous verses, like I've mentioned, repeated probably several times, are found in this section. Then it goes on to describe a bit of the nature of this satisfaction. Bhakti Yoga Prayojita, it says in the following verse, that's full of these special feelings, and it makes a clear distinction or clear elucidation on what does not constitute pure bhakti. So this famous distinction between bhakti and gyan and vairagya and dharma, all this comes in that verse, Vasudevi Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita, and later on in famous lines like Shrava, Evahi, Kevalam, etc. So it's going through there, defining bhakti, defining what it's not. Some contrasts are given later on as to what is not pure bhakti and what is the purpose of dharma. The purpose of dharma is not to satisfy one's senses, etc. And then the idea of the absolute truth is described, and this is the idea that was embraced by Mahaprabhu, Vedanti Tattva. So another very foundational verse is found there, with the emphasis coming in the next verse on Bhagavan, on well, he as the protector of the devotees. So it ends there. That section ends with that the devotee should hear and chant and remember and offer puja to the pati, to the protector. So one should do Sharanagati and hear and chant about Krishna. So that ends kind of the second section of the chapter, which is a very in-depth and complete definition of bhakti, and comparing it to the other main strands that one finds in the religious world at the time, defining it and saying what it's not. We find that carried out throughout our text. And then we did the third section last time, which is another very foundational section. This is actually where, the Madhurya Kadambini, for example, is really just an elucidation on this, an expansion of this. It's the stages of bhakti. So the stages that we find in Shikshastakam, they're found here in a series of verses here. Bhakti Vinod brought out there how Shikshastakam was showing these stages. Excuse me. And then we also see the Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, expanded it even further into Madhurya Kadambini. The whole book is about these stages. So the third section there started with a verse to invoke faith. This is similar kind of to the first verse of the Shikshastakam, emphasizing the great ability of bhakti to cut through the knot of karma. What was that verse? I think I got it right here. Yeah, vidyate hridaya grantis chidyanti sarva samshaya. Oh, sorry, that's the last verse of the section, but it's similar to, with this analogy of the sword cutting through the knot of karma, the knot of ahankar. And then the famous stages of bhakti are given, starting with the mercy of the devotees and service to devotees. So these are kind of two preliminary steps that sometimes aren't included in the classical ladder stages, but they're there. These are kind of the underlying parts, the roots going down. So the mercy of the devotees, that verse we know is Shushushro Sharahanasya Vasudeva Kataruchi Syan Mahat Sevaya Vipra Punya Tirtha Nishevanat. And then it goes to Shrunvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtanaha Vidyanta Sto Hyabadrani Vidhunoti Suvrtsatam. So here we're getting to the stage of Bhajana Kriya and Anartha Nivritti, where by hearing and chanting about Krishna, the heart is cleansed. And then the next verse, Nasta Praeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. We come to the stage of Nishta. Tadara Justamo Bhava Kama Loba Dayaschaye Cheta Etar Anavidam Stitam Sattve Prasidati. We come to the stage of Ruchi and Asakti. Evam prasanam manaso bhagavad bhakti yogataha bhagavat tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate. And then finally to the stages of bhava and praying in this final verse. And then, like I said, vidyate hridaya grantis, the knot of karma is cut. So we get these stages in this third section of the Bhagavatam, culminating in in prema and the darshan of the Lord. The eyes see his beauty, the nose smells his fragrance. The idea is that the Lord appears inside the mind, but he also appears outside. So when with one's eyes you see his beauty, smell his fragrance, your ears hear his giggling and charming laughter. All the senses are engaged, basically. By touching, the friends are holding his hands, the gopis are kissing him, the parents are patting his head or whatnot. So at this point, the vision of the Lord inside is also appearing outside. So there's no more compartmentalization. The inside is the same as the outside, and satisfaction is achieved. Prasidati, this is a word that we find throughout this chapter. is achieved for both him and for us, because being complete, there's not much that we can give him except for our hearts, and ultimately that's where he finds satisfaction and we find satisfaction. So that was just a running through again of these sections, these kind of three main sections of the chapter. The chapter, like I mentioned, is entitled Divinity and Divine Service. So the part of divine service has been explained in these beginning parts, or the path, the stages of the path, and the definition of what is involved. And now it's kind of pivoting to just describe more the object of the path, or the object of bhakti, which is Bhagavan. So we go from, well, the chapter is Divinity and Divine Service, but we go from divine service, now it's pivoting more to divinity. And this ultimately, this last section of the chapter, because it kind of changes a little bit here, this last fourth section of chapter 2 kind of segues into chapter 3. And chapter 3, as I mentioned at the beginning, is a chapter all about the different avatars of Krishna. So the many faces and the many emotional realities of God are described in the third chapter, leading up ultimately to if there's two kind of like core verses, one of them, core verses of Gaudiya Vaishnavism that Jiva Goswami and Krishnadas Kaviraj used to construct their Mangalacharans, and it's of course Vedanti Tattva Viras. Oh no, sorry, that's the first one. But in the second chapter, in the third chapter, where we're segueing into that's the first one, and we find the second one in the third chapter, which is Krishna's Tu Bhagavan Swayam. So these two things are put together, and basically we have Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and that's found in the third chapter. So here in this last section of chapter 2, we start to hear about the Guna Avatars. So basically, in a sense, we're starting to hear about the the lowest end of the object, the lowest end of Bhagavan. I mean, sometimes higher and lower is not maybe the best words to use. Perhaps you could think of in the more kind of external. That's a good word, because these ones, the Guna Avatars, are of course in relation to the gunas. So perhaps we're starting at the low end, basically, the more external or lower manifestations of divinity. And then it works its way up from the Guna Avatars to the Purusha, going all the way up through the most famous kind of avatars of Krishna, ultimately leading to Krishna and Balaram, who are Bhagavan Swayam. Excuse me. So here we're about to hear about the object of bhakti and its lowest manifestation as the Guna Avatar. And this is the famous Trimurti. So the three-formed Lord. So it's the Lord in relation to the three modes of material nature. So in a sense, the closest to us. So I'll just read this verse first. Sattvam Rajastama iti prakriter gunas trayar yukta para purusha eka ihasya date stitya dye hari varinchi hareti samgyaha shoyamsi tatra kalo sattva tanor niham suyu. So I'll read Prabhupada's translation, and then I'll read the translation from Vishwanath Chakravarti. It's not his translation, because Vishwanath Chakravarti didn't speak English, but from that commentary. So the transcendental Lord is indirectly associated with the three modes of material nature, namely passion, goodness, and ignorance. And just for the material world's creation, maintenance, and destruction, he accepts three qualitative forms of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Of these three, all living beings can derive the ultimate benefit from Vishnu, the form of the quality of goodness. So here we're getting the first descriptions of God, the one to whom the path of bhakti is dedicated. And let's just see how it's described in this one. Pardon me. Okay, if the one supreme Purusha, accepting the gunas of Prakriti, known as Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, for creation, maintenance, and destruction, is called Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva. The best results for the devotees will come from Vishnu with the Shuddha Sattva body. So just a little distinction in the translation here with the inclusion of with the emphasis of the term Shuddha Sattva, and that we'll see that word come up in the next couple of verses. So the Supreme Purusha accepts three qualitative forms, just like the verse said, for the maintenance, creation, and destruction of the material world. In this verse, Vishnu is singled out as the ultimate benefactor or ultimate object of worship for the devotees. And it's kind of important actually to understand these distinctions between these three faces of the Trimurti to avoid an aparad. And it's the second aparad to the holy name of the Lord, which is to, it's translated differently by different acharyas. Prabhupada translated it to see the demigods as equal to the Supreme Lord. But it's also translated sometimes to see, say, like Lord Shiva to be separate or independent from the Supreme Lord. So it's actually an important verse to understand, this verse and the following verse, because it gives one the knowledge so that one doesn't commit the second offense to the holy name. And Guru Maharaj often mentions in relation to a lot of these aparads that, you know, if you have the knowledge, it's actually very easy not to commit them. So if you have you know, the gyan about these things, then they're not such hard things to avoid. So like I said, often it's translated as the names of the demigods to be the same as the name of Lord Vishnu, but it can also be translated to consider, say, Lord Shiva as different or separate from Lord Vishnu. So it's a positive, well, here it instructs the devotees to focus on the kind of most positive form of Lord Vishnu, who provides over sattva. And sattva is the mode of material nature. Of course, we know that kind of governs the maintenance and the maintenance of the universe. It has the qualities of revelation of knowledge, and a certain amount of detachment to enjoyment. Although it does produce happiness, this main quality of revelation of knowledge is a positive thing for the devotees to cultivate. And actually, many of the symptoms of sattva are favorable because it gives, you know, the facility to understand. It reveals the nature of things, and as is said here and other places in the scripture, actually sattva can give one a glimpse. You know, can reveal Brahman in a sense. It can reveal a glimpse of eternity, or a glimpse of Brahman, the difference between Brahman and Jiva, or the similarity between Brahman and Jiva. So I've experienced it too, kind of sattva, this maintenance and steadiness and regularity, where it gives one a glimpse of eternality. Once just I was in the bathhouse with a devotee, and in the morning we're like, oh, here we go, another day. And he made this comment that struck me. He just said, oh, it's just one long day. And it struck me because it was, I mean, he said it in a positive sense, but just that the nature of sattva that permeates kind of like, you know, ashram life, where one is doing things very regularly in the mode of goodness and stuff. It gave this glimpse of, oh, it's just one day, one long day. And it kind of gave this glimpse of eternality. I think I heard Shyam Sundar maybe spoke of when he was in Vrindavan with Guru Maharaj and Vrindaranya, they would go every night to hear a certain sannyasi sing the Sandhya Artik at a temple. One of the famous temples at Radha Gokulananda. And every night he would sing the same song and the same tune in the exact same way. And Guru Maharaj commented that it was like a window into eternity. Of course, it's a spiritual thing in the sense that it's kirtan for the Lord in the temple and whatnot. But I mean, I'm speaking like of the regularity and the commitment and these kind of sattvic qualities, repetition and what kind of, he commented that I think Sean was thinking like, oh man, it's the same tune every night. And Guru Maharaj thought, oh, it's the same tune every night. It's a glimpse into eternality, a glimpse into the beyond. But that being said, sattva gun is still a material mode of nature. I think the example is given, you can be bound by rope, but can be bound by barbed wire or chains of iron, or you can be bound by chains of gold, but you're still bound. Or sometimes it's like there's wet stool and there's dry stool. So maybe comparatively dry stool is a little bit better, but it's still stool. And Gumarsh gives a nice example of the airport as describing Sattva Gun, that it allows you to take off, but it's not the destination in and of itself. There's all kinds of movies out there about people who end up living in airports, and it's a very bizarre existence. They get trapped in an airport for whatever reason. There's a few movies like that. So it's not a place that one wants to stay, but one wants to use in order to go forward. And it's a mistake actually to think that so people think this, and in other traditions, I think it might be taught that, but it's a mistake to think that by singling out sattva, by refining it or singling it out, that one will come to this idea of Shuddha Sattva or Vishuddha Sattva, pure existence, transcendental existence. Like that Krishna's form and identity is based out of, because actually the modes of material nature, they can never be disentangled. The modes do not exist in isolation ever, except for before the beginning of creation. I think it's said that the modes are in equilibrium, but that's not too much use to us. So basically, in our existence, the modes of material nature are never existing in isolation, never in a pure form. That's why this form of sattva is referred to as mishra sattva, which means mixed sattva, as opposed to shuddha sattva, which means pure existence, or vishuddha sattva, exceptionally pure existence. So it's always a tangled knot, the knot that we spoke of that before, that the sword will cut through, the sword of remembrance of Krishna that will cut through, the knot of ahankar that binds us to this world. Sattva is still a form of conditioning. It binds one. This is what the Gita says, is that it binds one to knowledge and happiness. So it cannot make something transcendental to itself. It is not transcendental, and therefore it cannot make something. So only something transcendental can make something transcendental. So it cannot make one transcendental to itself. They're constantly in flux. So there's examples. I read an example about milk. Milk being a very sattvic food, but then if one eats too much of it, so the element of rajas is mixed in, or if the milk is stale, an element of tamas is mixed in, then one becomes ill. So, or even the idea of sattvic food and whatnot. If you eat too much of it, it's not sattvic, or if it's too old, it's not sattvic anymore. So none of the gunas are really found in a pure state anywhere here in the material world. That's basically the point. So what the verse is saying here is that although Vishnu is presiding over sattva, Vishnu is nirguna, so he's beyond the gunas. So in this connection, it's meant to be understood that he presides over sattva by supervision. So there's kind of three ways in which these deities interact with the gunas. Vishnu is by supervision. Shiva is by proximity. He's a very special character. And then Brahma is by contact. So I was kind of thinking about it, and I guess I thought of it in this, maybe a good way to explain it would be something like in a factory. Like in a factory, you have all the guys down on the floor running the machinery, and the management is usually up in this office. At least that's the factories that I've seen, where there's, like kind of like some kind of staircase, fire escape staircase going up to a box, an office, and they're there in the factory, but they're removed from their factory and they're looking down through the window. They're doing their management, but they also have a view of what's going down on the floor. So they're involved by overseeing the work, by overseeing the work down below, but they're not actually down there involved in it. So they're never touched by the mode, and that's why the benefit for the devotees comes from worshiping Vishnu, because he's not actually touched or contaminated by the modes. Because nirguna worship takes one to nirguna. You can't be involved with the gunas and filter them out and get out of them. That's not possible. But if you're involved with something from the other side, something nirguna, then was able to get out of the modes. And Vishnu in any one of his forms is beyond the modes. So then we move on to a very special position of in the verse of Shiva. So both Vishnu and Shiva are described as Ishwar Chaitanya. So there's kind of living beings are divided into two categories. There's the Ishwar Chaitanya, conscious living beings, Ishwar Chaitanya and Jiva Chaitanya. And so both Vishnu and Shiva are described as being Ishwar Chaitanya. So they're independent consciousness, whereas Jiva Chaitanya is considered to be a dependent form of consciousness. So Ishwar Chaitanya is again of two types. There's untouched by Maya, which I just described as Lord Vishnu. And then there's one who accepts the touch of Maya, but by his own decision, by his own will, conscious decision. And so that would be Lord Shiva. And he's generally not a Jiva. I think in some very particular cases, perhaps he is. But so to understand this, we can look in the Brahma Samhita, which is such a beautiful book. It was discovered by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, embraced by him as being full of the Siddhanta of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and it's really nice because in other classes I've gone and looked at it and really found examples of what was being spoken about in this chapter. And here there's verses on Shuddhasattva and Shiva and Brahman. So the verse on Shiva goes, I worship the Lord, the Supreme Lord Govinda, who becomes the form of Shiva, who is said to be non-different from Govinda, but who is also different because of his contact with the transformations of Prakriti. Just as milk becomes yogurt, which is said to be non-different from its cause, but acts in a different manner. So the example here is given of milk and yogurt, and it's given to explain the idea of cause and effect, not transformation. It's not that Vishnu transforms into Shiva. But in this world, milk changes into yogurt with the contact of other yogurt or acids or whatnot, yogurt starter. So it changes to yogurt, but Vishnu doesn't change into Shiva. So he accepts a separate form of Shiva, and that form voluntarily takes voluntarily interacts with Tamagun, but it's made clear that he's still not contaminated. So in the example of the factory, this would be someone like a floor manager who comes down, who's part of management, but comes down and circulates on the floor of the factory. So he's not a worker or laborer, bound by the rules and regulations of working there. But he is in proximity with the workers. So he's an in-between. And on top of this, it's made clear that this manifestation of Shiva is again the lowest manifestation of Shiva, which is Rudra, the destroyer. So he's never touched by Tamagun, but the tattva of Shiva is very complicated. I don't think I don't fully understand the ins and outs of it either. But the tattva of Shiva goes much, much higher than that. So it goes from this Guna Avatar of Rudra that we're speaking about in these verses to Shiva's the husband of Parvati, easily granting boons to his devotees. Then it goes even higher to Mahadev Shiv, who we know, the Jnani, dressed in ashes, detached, and then to the purely transcendental Sada Shiva. Advaita Acharya is said to be a combination of Mahavishnu and Sada Shiva, and of course, manifestation like a Gopishwar Mahadev in Vrindavan. So Shiva is a very complex tattva, and goes very, very high to purely transcendental. And but what we're talking about here is Rudra, who's kind of on the lower end of things. So it's good to understand these things, so one doesn't make an offense to the second name of the make an offense to the holy name of the Lord. The second offense, Mahadev Shiva, is described as like a limb of Vishnu. So you can't massage one part of Shiva while stabbing the other. And so since he's a limb too, the idea is that it's an offense to consider him either separate or different. Prabhupada says something really nice. I was just reading in the 5th canto about Bharat Maharaj's sacrifices that he performed. And Prabhupada said that it was because it was talking about all the different demigods. So I just wanted to read about that a bit. And Prabhupada said that Shiva is nothing but Krishna's functional body. So I thought that was a nice sentence. Now Brahma is different in the sense because usually, because he's Jiva Chaitanya. So he's a dependent consciousness. And I think, once in a while in special yugas or kalpas or something, there can be an exception to that. But generally through performing Varnashram perfectly, a Jiva rises to the surface and takes the position of Lord Brahma. So he's invested with energy. He channels Lord Vishnu's power, but there's no real identity. There's no real identity in that sense. So he's empowered by this specific energy of creation from the Lord, and we can read that precisely in the Brahma Samhita again. So Brahma is described here when the text says, "I worship the Supreme Lord Govinda, who becomes Brahma, the creator of the universe, by bestowing his powers to that Jiva. Just as the sun displays a small portion of its powers of heat and light in all the sunstones which represent it." So that's pretty clear. He's an empowered being. The sun displays, I guess, I'm not exactly sure what a sunstone is, but the sun displays a small portion of its heat and light in these sunstones. So he's situated in Rajas. He's in contact with Rajas, like the workers are situated on the floor of the factory in contact with the machines and the grime, I suppose. But because the powers are conferred upon him, he's considered to be an avatar. So that's a description of the Guna Avatars, and then we'll go to the next verse, which is verse 24. Bhaktivad daruno dumas pasmad agnis tarimaya tamasas tu rajas tasmat sattvam yad brahmadarshanam. So here Prabhupada translates it, coal is better than raw wood, but I think what we mean here is smoke. So anyhow, coal is better than raw wood, and fire is even better, for fire is the soul of Vedic sacrifice. Similarly, passion, rajas, is better than ignorance, tamas, but goodness, sattva, is best because by goodness one can come to realize the absolute truth, Brahman. So I'll just read the other translation because it uses the word smoke, which makes it a little bit more clear, because the word is actually dumas. Duma means smoke, but Prabhupada didn't put that precise word. But this translation says, smoke is superior to dull wood, and fire, sacred to the Vedas, is superior to smoke. Similarly, rajas is superior to tamas, and sattva is superior to rajas, since it is favorable for realizing the Lord. So here the respective qualities and values of the gunas that we spoke about in the previous verse are given. We hear that about tamas, it's described as being like wood in the sense that it obscures knowledge. Vishwanath Chakravarti comments that it causes subtraction, which is interesting, destruction basically. And here it's represented by the wood because it has no quality of action compared to the others, and it's unable to kind of reveal anything in the way that fire would be. And then the next, rajas is compared to smoke because it agitates knowledge and causes addition or creation, and it has an active nature. And then finally, fire is given, sattvam yad brahmadarshanam, it says. So sattva is the quality of revealing knowledge. That's what this line here is saying. Sattvam, it has the ability to give darshan of Brahma, if it's mixed with a bit of bhakti, but and fire is active, it's used in the Vedic rituals. Sattva is devoid of inertia and agitation, and is superior because it can give vision of Brahman, of Jiva. But of course we know, it requires bhakti to do that, but of course we know a vision of Krishna is something else entirely. And that's Vishuddha Sattva. We find that word coming in the next verse, which is an important word. So Sattva is superior amongst the three, and the reason for that is because it's not unfavorable for realizing Shuddha Sattva. It's not obstructive, it doesn't cover it, it doesn't interfere, but like I said, without bhakti, seeing the Lord is impossible. So one would conclude by reading this verse that Rajagun is superior to Tamagun, and it is. in the hierarchy, and Sattvagun is superior to Rajagun, because fire is superior because it has heat and light, and it can reveal things, and smoke is superior to wood because it has movement and one can perceive some heat in it. But this, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur makes a comment that this doesn't mean that the presiding deity of Rajas, Brahma, is superior to the presiding deity of Tamas, who is Lord Shiva. It's actually the reverse. So one can, he gives the example, I think, that one can extract the fire that's hidden in the wood through friction, but one cannot extract fire and light from smoke. So this example is not, it's good in indicating the hierarchy of gunas and which is the most favorable, but it's not saying that the deity is presiding. It's not correct in the sense that the deity is presiding over those gunas are in that hierarchy. Yeah, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur also comments by citing an example from Vedanta. We find this also in Guru Maharaj's Tattva Sandarbha, where they cite deepless dreamless sleep. So the sleep where one is not dreaming, where one is not conscious of one's body or mind at all. This is an effect of tamagun. As a comparison, they compare this to actually to experiencing pure consciousness or the bliss of oneness with Brahman, because it's kind of, it took me a little while to get my mind around it, but the mind and the body shut down. So the physical realms and the mental realms, the mental realms of consciousness, the physical realms of consciousness all merge into this deep sleep, shushupti. But what happens is the experience upon waking, one remembers that one has slept well. When you have a night full of dreaming and nightmares, sometimes you don't feel like when you wake up, you feel very rested. But when one has really deep sleep and it's just like, bam, you're out, and you wake up in next morning, one remembers that one had rested really well. So even in this state, it appears to be oblivion, but upon waking, one has the experience that I'm rested, I've slept well. And the idea basically is that there can't be a remembrance of a thing that one has no experience of, so that one was there beyond the awareness of the body and the mind experiencing that state of rest. So the mind and body had shut down, but there was still someone there having experience of resting. And anyhow, the point is simply that, that Vedanta makes, Jiva Goswami, this is found in the Tattva Sandarbha, just that the effect of tamagun, of this deep sleep, kind of compared to Rajagun is higher. So the idea is that Shiva is considered to be superior than Lord Brahma in this way, in that he's more connected to pure consciousness. So it gives us these verses give us some orientation in relation to this Trimurti, the three, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, the Guna Avatars of the Lord, and how to see them, all in relation to Vishnu, and therefore to avoid any offenses. Mahaprabhu was very, very open to all the different manifestations of the Lord, especially Shiva. He had so much respect for Lord Shiva. And his journey in the south of India, he was going into Shiva temples and offering respects. He even, throughout the Chaitanya Bhagavat, took on the bhavs of all these different manifestations, like Shiva or Devi, who are different. Some may be demigods, some may be in a special higher category. So these two verses, actually, these two Srimad Bhagavatam verses that I just read, text 23 and 24, are actually quoted in Madhurya Kadambini. So you see how much Madhurya Kadambini is based on this chapter. It's, it has a definition of pure bhakti, it has the stages of bhakti, and then when it gets into the stage of anartha nivritti, I think, and it's going through the, all the different aparadhs and whatnot to avoid, these two verses are found. So many of these verses are foundational to Vishwanath Chakravarti's, lovely book about practicing bhakti, Madhurya Kadambini. So we'll move on to verse 25. What's the time? We have 15 minutes. Verse 25. Ejire munayo tagre bhagavatam adhoksajam sattvam vishuddham kshemaya kalpante yenutaniha. So previously, all the great sages rendered service unto the transcendental personality of Godhead, Bhagavan, due to his existence above the three modes of material nature, sattvam vishuddham. They worshipped him to become free from material conditions. Whoever follows such sages is also eligible for liberation from the material world. And here we have Vishwanath's English version, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's English version, where he says, therefore, all the ancient sages worship the Supreme Lord, beyond the material senses composed of Vishuddha Sattva. Those who follow the sages attain liberation in this world. So in this verse, Bhagavan is described as beyond the material senses, adhoksaja. This is a word that's used again. We find it several times in this verse, in this chapter. We found it, of course, in the seminal verse of Savai Pumsam Paro Dharmo. And we find it here again, emphasizing the point that Vishnu, or the Lord Krishna, ultimately Krishna, is adhoksaja, beyond the material senses. Adhoksaja refers to, like, transcendent. It also refers to Krishna and Vrindavan, as we spoke about being born under the axle of the cart. And it also speaks of him as being composed of Vishuddha Sattva. So here this verse is contrasting the sattva spoken of in the previous verses, the previous two verses, and this new idea of Vishuddha Sattva. So beyond the sattva of the material creation, which always has, as I mentioned, some admixture of rajas or tamas, the strands are always knotted up to a certain extent. There's this Shuddha Sattva. So in this context, Shuddha Sattva means pure existence, Shuddha and then Sattva, existence. Because Sattva, besides meaning the mode of goodness and whatnot, means that kind of which sustains or maintains a thing, the quality of a thing. So this means pure existence. In the transcendental realm, this is referred to as Sandhini Shakti. So Shuddha Sattva is basically Sandhini Shakti, the Lord's, the power that maintains. But even purer than this, even up the hierarchy a little bit, even purer than Shuddha Sattva. I mean, they're kind of essentially the same thing. I'm not sure that there's too much of a distinction, but we hear these different words, and Jiva Goswami in the Brahma Samhita does make a slight distinction. So above this Shuddha Sattva, or pure existence, there's something even purer still, which is called Vishuddha Sattva, and that's what we see in this verse, Sattvam Vishuddham. So Vishuddha Sattva is functioning by the Lord's Chit Shakti, and it's described as being made up of Sandhini, so the Shuddha Sattva that we spoke of before, but as well Sambit and Hladini, and this is what manifests the form of Bhagavan itself. So there's a nice verse in the Brahma Samhita, of course, that describes this. It says, in English, it says, I worship the Supreme Lord Govinda, whose material energy, Maya, consists of the three gunas described elaborately in the Vedas, produces hundreds of universes, while he himself is pure sattva, Vishuddha Sattva, existence, which is the cause of material sattva, which manifests his blissful form. So this verse speaks of his blissful form as being manifested in Vishuddha Sattva. And there's another very famous verse that I'm going to read, that's speaking of this nirguna manifestation of the Lord. And it's this nirguna form that the sages are worshiping, because mentioned in this verse, the sages of yore, I think. Whoever follows these, previously all the great sages rendered service unto this transcendental personality, and whoever follows such sages is also eligible for liberation of the material world. So the sages, they're worshiping this nirguna manifestation of this Lord Vishuddha Sattva, and because in order to get out of the gunas, the worship needs to be directed towards something that is beyond the gunas. So here's a famous verse spoken by none other than Lord Shiva to Sati, and he says, Sattvam Vishuddham Vasudeva Shabditam Yad Iyate Tatra Pumam Aparvrita Sattve Cha Tasmin Bhagavan Vasudevo Yadhoksajo me namasa vidhyate. I'm always engaged in offering obeisances to Lord Vasudeva and pure Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is always pure consciousness in which the Supreme Personality of Godhead, known as Vasudeva, is revealed without any covering. So basically the verse is saying that the state of unalloyed being, Vishuddha Sattva, is called Vasudeva because the personal God is revealed therein, or he is revealed without any covering within this state of unalloyed being, Vishuddha Sattva. So Vishuddha Sattva is not just sattva that has been refined and purified. I've mentioned that several times. Increasing one's sattva in one's life is useful because it increases the facility to understand things, spiritual subjects. Decreasing rajas and tamas is useful because they tend to obscure things and bind one to things. But bhakti is not dependent on these gunas at all. So one does not need to be in sattva to practice, although it can be beneficial. But even Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that sattva binds one to happiness and knowledge. So this Vishuddha Sattva is a different thing. Sattva is still a form of conditioning. Vishuddha Sattva is entirely transcendental. So it's this very special pure existence where the form of the Lord is revealed, and it's nice. It's called Vasudev, or Vasudev with a short a. So the Lord is revealed there in this Vasudev with a short a, and that of course is a name for Krishna's father. In the very beginning of the Bhagavatam, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, it's given there Vasudev with a long a, referring to Krishna. But Vasudev is the father of Krishna, and he's addressed or described as the embodiment of that pure state of Vishuddha Sattva. Prabhupada makes a really nice comment in, where is it? It's just back in chapter 1, text 12, where the sages are asking about, they asked a series of 6 questions. One of them was tell us about Krishna who took birth from Devaki and why and whatnot. All blessings upon you, O Sutta Goswami. You know the purpose of the personality of Godhead's appearance in the womb of Devaki as the son of Vasudeva. And Prabhupada makes a really nice comment in that, when the sages are glorifying Sutta and asking the question of his purpose, he says, where is it? Oh, Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, appeared to Devaki, the wife of Vasudeva. And then he says, Vasudeva, with a short a, the father, Vasudeva is the symbol of the transcendental position wherein the appearance of the Supreme Lord takes place. So there, Prabhupada is saying in his purport, the same thing that Lord Shiva says to Sati in the 4th canto of the Bhagavatam. And from Srila Prabhupada's Chaitanya Charitamrita commentary, he gives kind of a synopsis of Jiva Goswami's explanation of these potencies. So he says, the transcendental potency by which the Lord maintains his existence is called Sandhini. The transcendental potency by which the Lord knows himself and causes others to know him is called Samvit. And the potency by which he possesses transcendental bliss and causes his devotees to have this bliss is called Hladini. The total exhibition of these potencies is called Vishuddha Sattva. In the mundane mode of goodness, there are tinges of passion and ignorance. Being mixed, it is called Mishra Sattva, but in the transcendental variegatedness of Vishuddha Sattva, it is completely free from all mundane qualities. Vishuddha Sattva is therefore the proper atmosphere in which to experience the personality of Godhead and his transcendental pastimes. So it's not that he's of this world, and the form of the Lord, his pastimes are not of this world. So the idea here is that by worshiping Vishnu, one is able to extract oneself. And I guess the point too is that this Vishuddha Sattva is also it's really just another word for bhakti, the internal energy of the Lord, because the Lord only manifests himself in bhakti. So when one's heart is infused, with bhakti, with his internal energy, then the Lord's form can make an appearance in the heart there. So now we can do one. I think there's time for one more verse, verse 26. 25, 26. Okay. So Mumukshabo Gaurarupam Hitva Bhuta Patin Ata Narayana Kalashanta Bhajanti Hi Anusuyava. Those who are serious about liberation are certainly non-envious, and they respect all. Yet they reject the horrible and ghastly forms of the demigods and worship only the all blissful forms and plenary portions of Lord Vishnu. Rejecting the frightful forms of other devatas, persons desiring liberation, what to speak of the devotees, without criticizing those devatas, worship the avatars of Narayana. So it's very similar. So here in this next verse is contrasting the great sages who worship the Vishuddha Sattva form of the Lord with those in the lower modes of nature and those who have other aspirations. So what stands out really in this verse is well, a couple things. The horrible and ghastly forms that some people worship in order to fulfill their desires, and also the description of the devotees as anasuyavaha, or non-envious. So it's a nice description of the devotees. We find it at the very, very beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Dharma Projita Kaivatotra Paramam Nirmatsaranam Shatam. So Satam. So the devotees are truthful Satam, but they're free from any envy. Their hearts are completely pure. Nirmatsaranam is the word, Nirmatsaranam Satam. So this is a description of the devotees that we find in the very beginning. We find it here too. And it's an important point to bring out, because often we hear most things can be dovetailed in devotional service, almost anything, even things like anger. And I think in what's escaping my mind right now, the book, but I think Narottam Das Thakur explains how even some of these unbecoming qualities like anger and whatnot can be used in the service of the Lord, dovetailed in the service of the Lord. But I've heard Guru Maharaj say that actually envy is the only one that it is not possible to dovetail. It's different than jealousy. Jealousy is where one maybe wants something that another person has, or wants some quality or result that another person got. But envy is on a different level, and that's where one can't tolerate somebody else's success. And we see like how that's completely absent in Vrindavan. All the devotees in Vrindavan, they want whoever's best at serving Krishna to be pushed forward and do that service. Whoever has the best idea for serving, even if it's not one's own idea, they want to push that person forward. So the devotees are described in that way in this verse. And then, the people who are desiring other things other than Krishna's pleasure, that the type of the forms that they're willing to worship in order to get those results. Gora Rupam, right? These ghastly forms. And the verse makes it clear that the devotees don't criticize these forms, or they have no envy, they have no reason to. But those are not the forms that the devotees worship. I can just end with a real quick story about Srila Sridhar Maharaj, where he lived in Bengal, where there's a lot of worshippers of Kali, who in a sense is at least visually is kind of ghastly looking woman, violent and severed heads and severed arms and whatnot, blood. It is a ghastly image. But there are many Shaktas, many devotees of Kali in Bengal, and I guess some very erudite and intelligent devotee of Kali came to debate with Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and Srila Sridhar Maharaj, before beginning the debate, just kind of wanted to be, okay, well, let's just lay out who it is we're exactly talking about, and had this, I think it was a lady actually, had a lady describe, Kali and describe Krishna, or Shyam Sundar, this, beautiful young boy, all these charming, soft, gentle qualities, and then had her describe Kali, with fangs and severed arms as a skirt, and in cremation grounds and whatnot, and just kind of laid out the description of the two goals or the two deities and was kind of like, well, where do you want to go? Which one do you want to associate with? And in that way, he didn't even really debate with her. He just kind of, showed how charming and lovely Krishna is compared to kind of a ghastly form of what, why would you want to spend one's time there? Like even Durga, I mean, she's got so many arms and so many weapons sitting on a tiger. What do you want to do? You want to get on the tiger with her? You might get cut or something. Whereas with Krishna, one's invited to participate in cow herding or the rasa dance, all these kind of lovely things. So he made that point very simply and very, very nicely to her. I'm not sure what the result was actually, but I've heard Gumash tell that story a couple times. So I guess I'll stop there because we're right at 10:30 now. There's still a few more verses in this chapter that segue into the third chapter. So we spoke about the kind of lower forms of the Lord, the Guna Avatars, the most intertwined or the ones with the most proximity to the material world. And then it's going to slowly move. They made some comparison between the transcendental Vishnu forms and other forms that are touched or ghastly. And then now we're going to move on into the Purusha. And then it kind of segues into the third chapter where it speaks of that and then goes kind of up the ladder, from Matsya to Kurma, all these wonderful devotees, ending with Krishna and Balaram. Not quite ending, but they're right up at the top, and the famous verse, Krishna's to Bhagavan's Swayam. So we'll see that in the next couple classes. So I'll end there, and I don't know if anybody has any comments or if they have anything that they would like to share or any questions. I think we're supposed to have the questions put onto the Tattva Vivek so that everybody can participate in them. But if anybody has anything that they want to mention, please.
I wanted to ask, because I don't have a Facebook account. Oops, I just lost you.
Yep, it's here.
I know how to do it. And I just wanted to ask you that, what do you say about Rudra in comparison to Shiva?
Well, this is found, I think I read about, well, all I was saying that is Rudra is kind of like a lower manifestation of Shiva. Rudra is the destroyer. Rudra is the Guna Avatar. And then just like there's a different kind of hierarchy of manifestations of Lord Vishnu, there's also kind of different hierarchy of Lord Shiva. Of course, they're one and different at the same time, but Lord Rudra, the destroyer, is the one who's most intimately involved in the material world, in tamagun, in destruction. And then there's different manifestations of Shiva going up from, to Mount Kailash, Shiva Loka, and then Sadashiva is completely beyond, is completely transcendental. Or for example, Gopishwar Mahadev is in Krishna Lila. So he's a kind of higher, for lack of a better term, manifestation of Shiva. Whereas Rudra is kind of a lower manifestation of Shiva.
Okay.
Like something like that.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. Shiva is a super complicated and nuanced tattva, so I'm not very expert on it, but that's what I've understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have anything they would like to share or any corrections?
Jai Gaur, it's Omkar here.
Haribol.
I just wanted to ask if you could clearly or quickly tell me what's the difference between Shuddha and Vishuddha.
Well, Shuddha means pure, and Vishuddha means like especially pure, or I'm not sure what the technical word for that would be. Sham, do you know what? A prefix. It's a prefix, right? So it's like a little thing that's put on the beginning of a word to emphasize it or bring it up a notch. So Shuddha Sattva refers to pure existence. Shuddha Sattva, pure existence. So that's existence beyond the modes of material nature. It doesn't have anything to do with the Shuddha, the Guna Shuddha, the Mishra Shuddha. So it's pure existence. And another word for that is Sandini. we hear about these three Shaktis in the transcendental world, right? Sandini. So it would also be like the Sat, the pure existence. Now, Vishuddha, and I've heard that there's not really much of a difference actually between Vishuddha and Vishuddha Sattva and Shuddha Sattva, but Vishuddha Sattva just means like a special purity, a special pure existence. So it's just kind of bringing it up a notch. It is distinguished. Jiva Goswami does distinguish it in the Bhagavatsandara, but I didn't go through it because it's quite complicated. The place that I saw it was in the Brahma Samhita, his commentary on the Brahma Samhita. He said Shuddha Sattva refers to the Sandini, and Vishuddha Sattva refers to the Chit Shakti in the spirit, the spiritual Shakti in whole, including Sandini, Samvit, and Hladini. And it's with all those three together that the form of the Lord takes place. So that's, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, Jai, thank you. That sounds complicated. Maybe further look into it is in order.
Yeah, I guess it's like Shuddha Sattva is like pure existence, and Vishuddha Sattva is like very pure existence, or something like that. It's a prefix. And anybody else have any comments? Okay. Well, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.